Welcome to a beginner's guide to VORTEX part 5. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to resolve conflicts between your various mods and the ways in which it can affect your game. In part 4 of this series we did discuss conflicts with regards plugins, where two plugins would attempt to change the same thing, and basically this would be a conflict and you had to resolve it by deciding which plugin would win the conflict by placing it lower in your load order. Well, the subject we're talking about today is actually kind of similar to that. You see, mods don't just have conflicts that are within the plugins they provide. They can have conflicts because they attempt to add the same file as another mod. It can be they try to add a plugin with the same name, or, and this is slightly more common, it could be that they're trying to replace the same texture, the same model, or even the same script. Now, don't panic if that doesn't make a huge amount of sense right now. Believe it or not, the easiest way to understand what we mean by this sort of conflict is to show you a number of types of conflict and how we would go about resolving them and the effect it has on your game. The mod that I'm going to use to show you how to fix a fairly simple conflict is Luxor's Weathered HD road signs. This is a mod that replaces the road sign textures with ones that are very high quality but also a little more weathered looking. But I already have a mod called Noble Skyrim Mod HD 2K installed, and this is a mod that replaces a lot of textures, in fact probably most of the architecture in game, including the signposts. So we're going to have two mods changing the textures for the same signposts. This is a fairly common use case, as you will find a lot of people install a large texture overhaul and then install small specific mods to change one or two textures. So I've downloaded the mod file, and obviously the next step is to simply install it using VORTEX. And once the installation process has finished, just enable the mod. At this point you can see a small red lightning icon appears next to the Dependencies icon, and this is telling me that I have a conflict, and it's even telling me which mod I'm conflicting with if I hover over it. It's conflicting with NSM, which is the Noble Skyrim mod. Don't worry, fixing this is trivially easy. Simply click on the red lightning icon and you will be presented with a pop-up box that asks you to define a rule between Luxor's Weathered HD road signs and NSM. As you can see, there are 6 conflicting files, and in fact if you click on this link here it will tell you what those files are. Click anywhere else to close that. Don't worry about those individual files at this moment. Now currently there is no rules set, but if I go to this drop down menu I can choose before, after, or never together with. I'm going to be selecting after, which is the suggested option, and this means that the files in Luxor's Weathered HD road signs will load after the NSM files. All I need to do now is hit save, and when it's finished, deploy the mod. Give it a few seconds, and I'm done. And when I boot up the game, there are the new weathered textures working perfectly alongside all of the other textures in the Noble Skyrim mod pack. At this point I do want to stress something. There is no right way to resolve a conflict in a case like this. There is only a way to resolve the conflict in a way that gets you the result that you want. So for example, had I clicked on this icon and made Luxor's Weathered HD road signs load before NSM, that would have worked perfectly. I would have had no problems and VORTEX would not have complained in the slightest. There's nothing wrong, technically, with resolving the conflict this way. However, the Luxor's Weathered HD road signs mod would simply get replaced by NSM, making it more or less useless. So if I do run with that rule and deploy, and then check in game, I will not see the new textures at all. They will simply not be there, and I'll be looking at the Noble Skyrim mod textures instead. In actual fact, VORTEX will warn you if a mod has been made completely redundant, if every file in that mod has lost the conflict. It will give you a warning up top, and if you click show, it will tell you exactly which mod has been made redundant. You can either hit close and fix the issue, or if this was intentional, disable the mod from here. Occasionally, you're going to find a mod that doesn't just conflict with one mod, but actually conflicts with two or more, and this can be slightly more complicated. To demonstrate this, I'm going to use a mod called Ars Farmhouse and Handcarts, which is a mod that obviously replaces those items along with some fences, and I'm specifically going to be focusing on the farmhouse and fence part of the mod because that shows everything I need to show. At the time of making this video, I'm going to need the main file for Ars Farmhouse. I'm also going to need a hotfix for a texture problem, and because I'm using a mod called SMIM, I need the SMIM rope patch 2.0, so I'm going to be downloading 3 files for this mod. Once all 3 files have downloaded, I need to install the main farmhouse file first, just by clicking on install as normal. Once that's done, I just enable the mod, it will start to deploy, and it will then tell me there are some unresolved file conflicts. If I go along to the red lightning arrow and click on it, as I did before, I can see that this mod actually conflicts with a mod called SMIM, which is a mod that replaces a lot of the models and meshes with much higher polygon count versions, so they look better, and once again Noble Skyrim mod, so it's conflicting with some of the textures. Now, as before, I'm using both SMIM and NSM as a base, but I want to install this mod on top of them, so I need to load after both SMIM and NSM. Hit save. I definitely want to install the hotfix, otherwise I would get a missing texture, so I'm just going to enable that. And immediately I can see this conflict with the main mod. Now that may sound a little strange, but this is actually quite common. It's because the hotfix is replacing something in the main mod. So I just click there, and I definitely want this to load after the hotfix is replacing the original files. And then I hit save. And finally, let's not forget the SMIM rope patch, because I am using SMIM as well. Install that the exact same way. As expected, there are conflicts. If I click on the lightning icon, I can see the problems are with the farmhouse mod and SMIM itself. This is completely expected. You will normally find any compatibility patch you install will have a conflict with the mods it's trying to make compatible. What is a little unexpected is the fact that VORTEX seems to be suggesting that I load this compatibility patch before Farmhouse and before SMIM. This is unexpected because normally compatibility patches load after the mods they're attempting to make compatible. Now, what has actually happened here is VORTEX has detected that this compatibility patch is made up of files that are older than the files it's finding in the Farmhouse mod and the SMIM mod. This makes it look like the compatibility patch is out of date, and it may be. However, as a compatibility patch, it almost always has to come after. So I did test it, and after does seem to work. You may want to check with the mods in question. If you get this issue, you may want to make sure that the compatibility patches are still okay with a newer version of the mod. The recommendation from VORTEX can be useful, but there is no replacement for doing a little research and finding out where you're supposed to place these mods and in what order they need to be loaded. So I'm leaving it as after in both cases, and of course I'll need to save and then deploy. Again, there are no plugins with this mod, so I don't need to check the plugins tab. And once I check in game, I can immediately see that the textures have changed. The thatching on the roof is a lot darker, the wood is a lot brighter, and indeed there are even signs of brickwork now rather than just pure wood. And we can also see some of the stone walls have now been replaced with wooden fences. And that is basically it. I now have this mod installed on top of Noble Skyrim and SMIM, and I have all of the conflicts resolved the way I want them resolved. Now, what I'm about to say will seem extremely obvious and self-evident to most of you, but I'm going to say it anyway because it does allow me to illustrate something else about VORTEX. If a mod is set to load after another mod, that other mod loads before this mod. I know, pretty obvious, but it does highlight the fact that rules can be specified from two directions. And if I open up the main farmhouse mod, you can now see there are two new rules. They are locked, but they were the ones that I set up in the compatibility patch and in the hotfix. As you can see, they are set to before because over in those files, I set them to after. And indeed, if I want to, I can actually unlock the rule so it no longer applies to the other file. I'll get a little confirmation, remove rule, and then I can set it here to before, as it should be, save, and it will have the exact same effect as if I'd set it in the compatibility patch itself. What I'm about to do is not something I would recommend for beginners. However, I do want to show you what happens when you change the rules, how it affects your game. So I'm going to go back to my farmhouse mod and I'm going to look at those original two rules. The load after SMIM, which is the models pack, and load after NSM, which is the texture pack. It makes perfect sense to have this mod load after those. They're big mods that replace a lot of items. This mod is something that just replaces one or two items, and so it makes sense that it sits on top of those two. It loads after. But what happens if instead of loading after both of them, I load it after SMIM, that's the models, but I load it before NSM, that's the textures. And once it finishes deploying, we can start up the game and see what has changed. Remember, I still have the farmhouse mod installed, but the buildings ahead of me clearly have the Noble Skyrim textures on. There's no sign of the bricks that would occur at this bottom area, so it's almost as if the mod has not been installed. Almost. Do you remember the woven fences you would find outside this inn? They're gone, and they've been replaced by the wooden fences that come with the farmhouse mod. And actually, at a cursory glance, this looks pretty good to me. I've got the Noble Skyrim textures on the building in the background, but I've got these cool fences. So I might be tempted to run the game like this. However, there may be other hidden problems. Remember, I've changed the models to replace the SMIM ones, but I've not replaced the textures. And I can tell you there is one problem close by. The stone walls have been replaced by more wooden fences. Unfortunately, the textures that go with those fences have not been replaced, and it looks, well, pretty ugly. The question is, can I fix this? If I go back to the farmhouse mod in VORTEX and click on the lightning icon, I can actually see all of the different files that are conflicting for each mod. And I know for a fact that my problem currently is in the Noble Skyrim mod, so it's probably one of these 17 conflicting files. If I click here, it actually tells me which files Noble Skyrim is adding that conflict with textures that the farmhouse is adding. If I actually click this button here, Edit Individual Files, it actually opens up a new screen that shows me every file that is under conflict in Farmhouse and which mod will win that conflict. So for example, if I check the top one, I can see that in this conflict, the file that comes with the Farmhouse and Handcarts SMIM rope patch is the one that will get used, not the one from the main mod or from SMIM. This is the compatibility patch. If I look down here, this file is going to be supplied by the main Farmhouse mod. The problem I'm having with these fences that have replaced the the stone walls is a problem that's going to be found in textures. Now, I happen to know from a little bit of testing that the problem is the woven fence texture. And one of the things I could do to fix this is go along here. I'm going to scroll down a little and I can see it's defaulting to the Noble Skyrim version of the woven fence texture. I need it to use the Farmhouse one, and I can do that. I also need to do this file here, wovenfence01_NDDS. Don't worry too much about what these files are at the moment. I'm not expecting you to do this. Just be aware that this sort of thing is possible. I can go to individual textures and have them override the default rule. So even though all of the Noble Skyrim textures that are in conflict will win by default, these two textures will be from the Farmhouse mod. So in this specific case, the Farmhouse mod will win the conflict. In all of the other cases, Noble Skyrim will win. I hit save. I then deploy. You will probably also notice I now have a little exclamation mark icon next to the Farmhouse mod. This just tells me that the mod overrides some of the default rules. In fact, if I click here, it actually opens up the screen again so I can edit the specific files once more. I'm going to cancel that. And now I'm going to start the game and see what has changed. I still have the Noble Skyrim textures on the buildings. I still have the fences outside here instead of the woven fences, but now the stone fences have been replaced by these wooden posts and they have the correct texture. You can see this looks a lot better. I have fixed this issue. Now, there may be a lot of other issues. I've not spent much time inspecting this. What I would actually have to do now is run around and check every building and every item that the Farmhouse mod has changed and probably check it in multiple locations and see if there are any other problems. And then if there are, try to figure out if I can fix them. Whether I can, well, that remains to be seen, but is definitely out of scope for this video. What I really want you to take away from this is the idea that you can actually play with the order the mods are loaded and get some different effects in game. And occasionally you may get something that's less than desirable, but with VORTEX you do have the power to fix it if possible. So we've tried loading the Farmhouse mod after SMIM and before NSM, but what happens if we reverse that? If we load it after NSM and before SMIM? Well, let's try and see what happens. So after Noble Skyrim and before SMIM, I hit save and immediately it says mod rules contain cycles. Now, to explain what this means, I'm going to click on the button marked Show. It will open up this pop-up and it will tell me that I've got dependency rules between the mods that contain cycles, as in A comes after B, B comes after A. Obviously, this is impossible. To see the actual mods in question, I can click on this link here and it will open up a diagram like this. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is left click on Farmhouse and drag it down or up. It doesn't actually matter, and drag these a little. And what these arrows indicate are the order in which the mods are loaded. So SMIM gets loaded before NSM. NSM gets loaded before Farmhouse, and Farmhouse gets loaded before SMIM. This is obviously not possible. SMIM cannot load until this is loaded, this cannot load before this is loaded, this cannot load before this. Now I could fix this by hitting close and going back to the dependencies and switching them both to after, which is probably how I would want it, or I can actually go back to the diagram, drag everything back again. I can actually reorder the dependencies by right clicking. So NSM is this one is the one that's probably the culprit. SMIM has to load after Farmhouse. This is probably wrong. If I right click on that arrow, I have the option to remove it, which would mean I would need to go and set it in the dependencies window, or I can flip the rule. This will make Farmhouse load after SMIM and NSM, which would work. So I'm going to do that. It closes it and immediately the warning has gone. I can quickly open up the dependencies and there you go. It's going to load after NSM and after SMIM. It may seem a little counterintuitive, but one of the things you can do in VORTEX is set up a conflict between two mods. You can deliberately flag two mods as conflicting with each other. This is actually very useful if you have two mods that you've downloaded and you want to test them out, but these mods should not be used at the same time. For example, I'm using the realistic AI detection mod, medium interior, medium exterior, but maybe I want to test out the light version. However, I shouldn't have them both running. To make sure I never forget this, what I can do is left click on the dependency part, link it to the one above, and I now create a rule. And I'm going to say can't be loaded together with, and then save. If I now try to enable the light version of this mod, I will immediately see a conflict. And there is no lightning icon, no way to resolve this. If I click more up here, it will just tell me I cannot have the two together. To fix this, I simply disable the first version of the mod, and then everything is fine and it starts to deploy. I can now switch between these two mods for testing, securing the knowledge that I can't accidentally have both of them enabled. VORTEX will not let me. I will have to disable one of them to deploy. And that is all we have time for in this video. I hope you guys have now got the basic information you need to understand dependencies and conflicts and how you can resolve them and make the mods work the way you want them to work. I also hope you can join me for the next video and I look forward to seeing you there. And until then, remember as always, have fun.